right? Sorry. Yeah. So basically, in using the lockdown, I mean, instead of actually proactively dealing with the problems that were created, the problems that Jason discussed in detail, the government actually, the entire approach was to use this lockdown and the restrictions and the possibility of the curtailed possibility of any dissent to bring about reforms that the government was uh, otherwise not being able to introduce. In April and May, the central government tried to get the state governments to introduce uh, to introduce ordinances and state laws to adopt model acts. In June, it decided that, but in June, then it decides that entry 33 of the concurrent list of the seventh schedule can be interpreted to include all agriculture. So it basically three farm laws were introduced in June as national ordinances. And then in September, in the monsoon session, these were passed to turn them into laws. Now, I just want to quickly sort of talk about the history of deregulation of agricultural markets. You see, there have been, and there have been various committees, various initiatives to bring about liberalization and deregulation of agricultural markets. There are 2 points that need to be noted in this. One is that, as you can see, the major action on this front took place during NDA governments. It was the Vajpayee government and then the Modi government. So, I mean, in the implementation of agricultural market reforms, although both Congress and BJP have asked for these reforms, have argued for these reforms, BJP governments have clearly been more proactive in doing it. The second thing is that until April, May of last year, and in all these different proposals that are listed here, uh, uh, the the idea was that these reforms have to be done in the domain of state governments and have to be introduced by state governments. Never until June, even under this government, was it ever suggested that these reforms can be brought about as national laws. So this is a distinct change that is made. So very often it is argued by people in this government that that uh, uh, that even the previous governments have argued for these reforms. So what is the problem? This is, however, not true. I mean, the all these model laws were, for example, designed as reforms of state laws. What has been introduced as national laws is in substance significantly different from what has been proposed in all these committees and these various model laws that were proposed. Now, just very quickly to give some history, I mean, last few years have been a period of intense agrarian crisis. And this agrarian crisis has been caused most importantly by decline in public support to agriculture, deregulation of input prices, increasing cost of agriculture, greater corporate penetration in provision of inputs and technologies, privatization of agricultural insurance, steep rise in fuel prices, and so on. So these have meant that cost of production in agriculture have gone up significantly. And all of this has resulted in an agrarian distress. An intensification of agrarian distress has been caused by this. Now, farmers who do not have access to public procurement system, which is the vast majority of farmers, are left at the mercy of private merchants and open markets in which prices are extremely volatile and are very often much below the cost of production, as Jason showed. Now, in this table, I've just listed, and I want you to look at the last column. This is the proportion of farmers who do not recover their cost. Cost C2 is the total cost that farmer incurs in production. And this is percentage of farmers growing different crops who do not recover, who did not recover in 2017-18, even the cost that they had put in for production of these crops. Okay, and as you can see, there is just such a vast majority of Indian farmers who are, and this really is telling statistic of what the agrarian crisis is about. No, now, Jason has shown this, how the stocks have accumulated. Now, accumulation of stocks in the recent years is directly related to the fact that the open market prices are very low, and wherever the possibility exists, farmers end up selling their produce to to government agencies. So places like Punjab and Haryana, practically all the wheat is sold to government agencies. It's sold to government agencies because uh, because open market prices are too low. So it's not as if government is very keen to procure. Government is being forced to procure simply because open market prices are too low, and that has resulted in accumulation of these stocks. Now, maintaining such large stocks has meant a considerable fiscal burden on the government. That's a situation that obviously a neoliberal state dislikes. India's system of public procurement and agricultural subsidies have been under attack from developed countries at the WTO. And in absence of an immediate solution to the problem, over the last few years, government has simply moved the losses of Food Corporation of India off its budget by making it borrow to show the expenses. So FCI's debts have mounted, and this has been offset this year in the budget. Now, it's interesting that in this backdrop, so you have this crisis, and then the pandemic happens, and all the things that Jason talked about happened during the lockdown. Now, instead of dealing with this, instead of providing relief to farmers, what the government does is brings about these laws. I don't have to waste time because I'm sure everybody is aware of what these laws are. But let me just say that these laws have significantly changed and opened the floodgates for corporate penetration in the entire supply chain, from production, where it's opened the gates for unregulated contract farming, to agricultural marketing, where it's basically not only deregulated agricultural markets, but actually given incentives to traders and companies to not do the marketing, do the purchase in regulated markets. So an incentive is provided to do the purchases outside the regulated market. And finally, the amendment to the Essential Commodities Act, which has meant the last leg of which has meant that the restrictions on stock holdings by private traders have been removed, which would directly affect the consumer prices. So basically, in the entire supply chain, the entire supply chain has been deregulated, and the gates have been opened for penetration of corporate sector. Now, this has obviously resulted in an unprecedented and really something that at least I have not seen in my lifetime, massive protests by farmers. The lockdown happened when we had massive protests on the question of the CAA Act. These were crushed when the lockdown was imposed. But then, by the end of the year, you see a massive upsurge of protests by farmers against these undemocratic laws that have been brought about. So that's really the history of agrarian change, the changes that have happened in the area of agriculture and rural economy over this last 1 year. Let me stop there. Thank you.